Alrighty, everybody. Hello, hello. Welcome to the very first episode of the Designer's Den for 2021. Excited to be in this year and excited to welcome my very first guest for this year, Craig Campbell. Craig, why don't you give it a little short introduction for yourself for those who might not be familiar?
Sure. I'm Craig Campbell. I'm the owner and lead designer at Nerdburger Games, and have also freelanced for a bunch of other games, including Wizards, D&D, a little bit of Pathfinder, Iron Kingdoms, Pip system stuff, um, Never Going Home, a few others, and I design RPGs, and like a lot of kind of varied like a number of games that are kind of very different genres and kind of different systems and sort of things, and I'm trying to build more of a presence with online stuff. With I partnered recently with Aloy Lasanta from Third Eye Games. We've got the Nerd Eye Twitch channel.
Ooh.
If you go looking for it, it's nerd_eye, which is Nerdburger plus Third Eye, Nerd Eye. And so we're doing like a bunch of actual plays and shorter chat shows like this sort of thing,
Okay.
about a bunch of different things. He and I and other people that are involved. So yeah, that's what I do.
Nice. That is actually probably one of the better summaries I've heard someone give. It gets kind of hard when you get working in tabletop RPG work. As you get further and further on, you're like, what do I include?
Yeah, right.
um,
Sometimes you just have to you have to clump a bunch of things together and be like, I
mhm.
designed a bunch of different games, and we'll talk about those later. I'm not going to sit here and try to whittle, like give you the whole elevator pitch of everything that I've designed, or talk about all the freelance work that I've done, because
Mhm.
I I haven't done that much. I feel like I've done a healthy amount.
You've done a good bit of stuff actually, and so um, actually, why don't we just talk about some of the stuff that you've done a little bit
Sure.
more at length? So, the primary game that you've done with Nerdburger is Capers.
Hmm.
Capers is, for anyone not familiar with it, it's actually a super cool game. Kind of like, and let me know if I'm describing this wrong, kind of like Roaring Twenties gangsters, but you've got superpowers for some people, and those people are called capers.
Gotcha.
And you play it using a deck of cards rather than you rolling d20.
Like, just what's going on over there?
I, I don't know. The robot is chirping. Something is. Well, it's fine. Sure, everything's fine. Um, but yeah, so you play it with a deck of cards rather than like a d20 system, which I kind of enjoy because it's a little bit of variety. While I love my dice, and there's no such thing as too many dice. Um, it's good to break out a deck of playing cards every now and again. They need love too. But yeah, so uh, capers. Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit more about capers? Because that was a short summary. I think I did all right.
Yeah, it covers the basics of it. Yeah, it's 1920s gangsters with superpowers. Um, and like, the idea is that in the world of capers, superpowers started popping up shortly after the world, right around World War I, right after the World War I, and started to kind of pop up. And when you get to, by the time you get to the 20s, people with superpowers are sort of like the tabloid celebrities. Like, they're people around the country have heard of them. They get written up in magazine and newspaper articles, but a lot of people haven't actually seen a caper like do something super.
Mm-hmm.
They've just heard about them, so they're almost like tall tales. And so, like, people aren't sure necessarily what to think of, like the tabloid stories, tabloid style stories about these people. And then on top of it, like, a lot of the people that are in the news about that are in the game centers around gangsters and law enforcement and so forth. You could certainly, there's capers in all walks of life, but I latched onto the 20s, the Roaring Twenties, with the kind of the romanticized version of that era, as opposed to these people are all murdering thugs, like terrible people, murderers and thieves, and
You didn't want to go with the Chicago
no,
version?
Al Capone's
Al
in there,
Capone.
but it's the romanticized version of Al Capone, as opposed to like the guy who was responsible for a lot of murder. Um, and but then the characters have superpowers, and so it's like, think of it as like X-Men B team, like street level superpowers.
Hmm.
Nobody is spinning the world off its axis. There's nobody that can mind control an entire city or anything like that. It's
Okay,
kind of
so
a little,
no Professor X, no Jean Grey, none of
no Jean
that.
Grey, no Magneto, no Galactus is showing up to wreak havoc. The idea being that the capers themselves they're going to affect the city that they're in. They're going to affect the neighborhood that they're in, but they're not going to be doing things that are going to be like world spanning.
Okay, all right. So they're the local. They just know when Timmy's in trouble, kind of thing. But
They
no,
can they can maybe. There's
get
and then
those
you mentioned,
premonitions.
sure. And then the playing card system that you mentioned
Hmm.
is every player, and the GM included, each has their own deck of playing cards, including two jokers. And when you make trait checks, you are flipping a prescribed number of cards based on how good you are at the thing you're trying to do, and you're flipping one at a time. And each card um, represents two things.
Hmm.
The pip value of the pip value on the card represents success versus failure. So you need a higher, like you might need a jack, for example, to succeed at something, a jack or better. And then the suit determines the degree of success or failure based on suit,
Okay.
from going diamonds worst to spades best alphabetically.
Okay. So.
So spades is always really good. So you could flip a king of clubs, and the king is really good. It's probably going to be successful, but it's clubs, so it's barely successful, and it's going to come with a complication. So you can decide, well, I've got more cards I can flip, so I'm gonna flip another one, press my luck on this. Now that king of clubs is gone. The new card replaces it, and then so you're like, did you get a good enough card with an even better degree of success, or did you now suddenly fail? And so you can keep flipping cards until you run out, but whatever card you stick with, or if you get to the last card, that's what you're stuck with.
Hmm.
So you're always like the idea being that like these characters, the characters are gambling with their lives. They're doing these really dangerous things, and then you as a player are also kind of gambling with the character. Like every trait check is a little gambling game.
Okay, and so it's a bit of like press your luck thing too, where you're like, I'm gonna do better. Oh wait, I tripped and okay. Well, no, this is. It's kind of a little bit like real life. Sometimes you do something and then you're like, no, I'm gonna do it better, and then you manage to do it absolutely spectacularly fail. You're,
Yeah.
uh,
And those are the best moments in the game, where the person presses and presses and presses, and then they get to that last card, and it's a gigantic failure or a botch, or they get the bad joker. There's the two jokers are split as the good joker and the bad joker, and the bad joker is really terrible. Like everything goes badly for your character when you flip that card.
ooh, that would be the one that I would draw when I needed to do something very important. That is my luck in RPGs. Even if I have a 5% chance of doing very, very well, um, I don't when it's important. I just.
Well, on the upside with the playing card thing is, like, once the bad joker's flipped, it's out of your deck for a while.
Hmm. That
So
is true.
you're not gonna get that card again until you shuffle your deck back up. And there's different requirements. There's rules and ways that define like when you shuffle your deck back
Hmm.
up. So your deck composition is also changing. So people will play the game and they'll count cards. They'll know, okay, my deck is still stacked with a lot of face cards because I haven't drawn many. And so now they might take more risks because they know they've got an increased chance of flipping face cards.
Oh, that's true. That is one thing that I can do. I can count cards. Um, unless we're playing poker, in which case that's not true.
When money's on the line.
Um, no, I actually still can. But if anybody's watching and wants to play poker, that's not true. Definitely bad at that. Yeah, so that's the original Capers in the Roaring 20s. You've done a few variations since then. So it's covering some other different eras and more alternative histories.
Sure.
Um, I think the one that I particularly liked was thinking of like the 1960s Cold War. It's like that's a very interesting era in history. I
Yeah.
I love history though. Um Actually, let me flip back to this. So it was Capers Noir, 1940s cops, criminals, mysteries, and monster.
Yep.
Because we had monsters in the 1940s.
Yes.
uh,
Well, the justification for that is World War II caused all this ridiculous destruction and death, and it thinned the veil between the land of monsters and the world of spirits and devilish things and whatnot. So some of those things crossed over.
no, that actually makes total sense.
In the aftermath of World War II.
Yeah. So then we pass, get on past World War II, and we get to Capers Covert. So that's the one I enjoyed. Then the 1960s Cold War with super spies and super villains. As cheesy as they are, I've kind of always had a soft spot for like really campy super villain, super spy movies. You gotta take James Bond, but make it campier.
Well, there's an element. There's a little element of the James Bond. Well, there's quite a bit of James Bond in Capers Covert, which is basically progresses to the 60s and says, okay, well now the government is starting to enlist these people with powers into covert organizations that are battling against supervillains around the world, and so it's super spies and supervillains with superpowers. And now they're super smart people who are making gadgets. And so that introduces your Q style gadgets and everything. And then there's like a minor but very useful tweak to the rules where characters in the core game, characters have a vice and a virtue. So you have a vice, the thing that you like, that your character's kind of stuck on, that it's bad for them, and then they have a virtue. It's like the one truth about your character that they'll never violate that. And when you get to Capers Covert, there's a shakeup in that where your character has, instead of a vice, you have a fatal flaw. So you have so if you're playing a villainous type character, you're playing like the super powered gangster, super villain types, and their organization. You can do the thing where like your character is so prideful that they will monologue, like they think so highly of themselves, and that's their fatal flaw. Like there's a list of fatal flaws for you to choose from, and you can make up your own that give you
the monologue though. It's like classic
kind of
trope.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I have to imagine that if I were ever to become a supervillain, that would be my downfall. Is that like I need to explain to you this brilliant plan that I had so that you can understand the brilliance of it, okay? Oh wait, it wasn't very. Oh darn.
It sounded better in my head, right?
I don't need you to pick it apart. Thank you. And then the I guess the most recent one that you did was Capers Offworld, which we've gone back to the 1920s, but with kind of a little bit more alternate history. It's a retro future sci-fi. Yes, dog. I'm sorry. Yeah, retro future sci-fi, like pulp action. So, kind of a little bit more.
It's Buck Rogers.
Yeah.
It's like Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon style retro sci-fi where like the characters have like the big bubble space helmets, and jetpacks, and the rocket ships look like rockets. Like they look like big conical things with fins.
Like the Jetsons. That's what I always think of when I think of like old school sci-fi. Everyone's gonna have these big bubbles, and they've got the little antenna.
Oh sure, yeah. And it's your spacesuit looks like a jumpsuit with like a stripe, down the arm on either side. Maybe a V stripe in the middle.
I don't know. Maybe get some color blocking if you're fancy.
And it's just an alternative to the original alternative where spaceflight gets discovered because of super smart individuals discovering a method to allow faster than light travel and allow survival in space, and be able to produce a breathable atmosphere inside of a ship and everything. And it hand waves a lot of that. It's like I use a lot of phlebotinum type terms. It was like you have an aether chamber and there's radiotronic emissions and all these it's techno babble stuff.
Yeah.
It's more about just getting the characters out into space and not worrying too much about the science. And then there's alien species, and you can run into that are all very classic kind of aliens, kind of Buck Rogers level alien species where everything like if you were to cosplay it, you could do any of the alien species easily because it would just be the equivalent of a person inside of a suit. There's no aliens that are like a hive of bugs or like a big blob thing or something. It's all just like you're a bird person.
Yes.
You're a fungus person.
So, like a lot of the Star Trek aliens. Very
Yeah.
humanoid and shaped suspiciously.
Yep.
I'm sure that wasn't because of budget. Okay. Let's see. I think that you had a couple of other things that you published under the Nerdburger imprint too. Shorter, kind of lighter games. I know Mergers and Acquisitions is one of them.
That was the first one, yeah.
Yeah. And then what's the other one? Die Laughing. Yeah, and I think that's covered the whole gamut of everything you had on the website at least.
Right. Well, that's the stuff that's out thus far.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, that is published. Die Laughing is a GM-less horror comedy, kind of very rules-light game with it's like next to no prep. You can generate a character in just a minute or two, and there's no GM, so you don't need to prep a bunch of stuff. You just need to pick a monster. And there's like an act and scene structure that's set up kind of to replicate sort of how a 3-act horror movie goes. And so there's like when you're in act 1, you're rolling randomly to determine scenes, and it's all the types of scenes that you would see in the first act of a horror movie. So it's all stuff about like the characters you're introducing characters and starting to create conflict between them, and there's occasionally the monster attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time you get to act 2, it becomes more about escalating, and the monster shows up more and more. And by the time you get to act 3 scenes, then it's pretty heavy on like now it's like the monster's a serious threat. Whatever characters are left are like having to decide whether they're going to are we going to flee this thing and just get out? Are we going to try to fight it? There's different things that are put in play that way.
So admission, I'm not a big horror person because they give me really bad dreams. Like, I have hyper realistic dreams sometimes, so it just doesn't really mix well. But so like Act 1 is like we're gonna chase this weird sound into the woods because we're idiots, and somebody's gonna die. And then Act 2, it's like, oh, they're probably just missing. Let's all go into the woods, and then it gets real, and then people really start dying. And then Act 3 is everyone panicking. Cabin in the woods style, and they're like, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of here. The old gods have not been appeased.
and the game is like nothing is prescribed as you have to play it gory or anything like that. Like you can play it cheesy, campy. I mean, it's kind of it lends itself well to like it's like a B movie. And the conceit for the game actually that I kind of skipped past is that what you're actually doing is you're playing characters in a horror movie, in a horror comedy movie. So when your character gets killed, in the game it's actually called being wrapped, as in that's a wrap for Ginny. Then your character's gone and they've been transformed into a sexy vampire, or they've been eaten by the blob or whatever. And then you become a producer on the movie for the rest of the game, and you continue to screw around with the production and influence the story as it goes along.
That actually sounds pretty cool. I might have to check that one out. That's perfect for a pandemic play, everybody, because you don't have to get your GM and your group together. You can all.
I mean, it's a simple game. It's like the whole system is built to just kill characters.
We can do that with any game. But yeah, no. So you've got a lot of stuff going there, and you said that's all that's listed on the site because it's all you have out now. Do you have anything upcoming that you can share with us?
Sure. Last year, in the fall, I kickstarted Good Strong Hands, and that successfully funded, and it's in production. It's been fully edited. The artwork is done except for 2 pieces. The layout is done except for like 20 or 30 pages. It's within a few months of going to print, of going to publish, and this will be like an offset print run too.
Okay.
Good Strong Hands is a game where you are portraying fantastic creatures living in a wonderful fantastical world, and every few hundred years, the void, this entropic force, comes and tries to destroy your world, and heroes must rise up to stave off the void and save the world of reverie. And you are those heroes. So it's influenced heavily by movies like The Neverending Story, Legend, Willow, Dark Crystal, Labyrinth. All of it's kind of it's a little bit of a love letter to like those like
Classic movies you had growing
kind
up.
kind of fluffy but also kind of dark 80s fantasy movies, because the game, you're playing like like whimsical fantasy creature types, but then the game is also built with a corruption mechanic. Like as you fight the void, there are things that slowly corrupt. There's a mechanic for slowly corrupting your character, and your character starts to gain corruptive powers. And if you gain too many of them, your character falls and becomes an agent of the void,
Ooh.
and you turn bad, and you don't get to play that character anymore.
Ooh. I like that.
But there are ways that you can prevent that.
Okay. Okay. And then you mentioned that you have a partnership with Third Eye Gaming, and that's focused primarily on like digital presence.
Well, it's a Twitch channel.
Okay.
So Aloy and I are both doing like we're gonna have, starting up in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna each have an actual play series running. His is gonna be on Wednesday nights. It's gonna be Part-Time Gods Second Edition.
Ooh.
Where you play part-time gods. You play like human beings who become gods of like some minor aspect. So you don't have to be a god full time. You can live your life, but then you also have your godly responsibilities. And then I'm going to be running on Saturday afternoons a campaign of a game. Waiting for I live on a main street, so it gets a little loud once in a while. I'm going to be running a campaign of Nowhereville, which is a game that I'm developing. So this will be a playtest campaign. It'll be for those people who want to get a glimpse into seeing like the game change potentially as we go along.
That's kind of fun to do that.
Some rules changes and some things about how some of the characters work might change as we play. It uses the same system as Good Strong Hands, just tweaked a little bit for what Nowhereville is, which is it's a Stephen King style horror game in a town that won't let you leave. So your character lives in this little Nowhereville town.
It's the Hotel California.
And there's bad things going on. Yeah, a little bit. And there's bad stuff going on. And people die, and people are monsters, and all this stuff happens. And but people everybody just ignores it and never really acknowledges that it's there. If you're familiar with it, if you've watched the movies or read the book, that's how the town of Derry is described, is like everybody knows that bad things happen in Derry, but nobody ever really does anything about it. And so that playtest will be kind of dealing with two horrors of small towns, which is like you're trapped in a small town with monsters, but then you're also trapped in a small town with people in a small town. And if you've ever lived in a small town, everybody knows everybody else. Everybody knows everybody's business. Everybody knows every stupid thing you've done. And you've like rivalries and hatreds build, and these people never move away from each other, so they're always constantly exposed to each other, and they get like these festering wounds keep kind of going.
Yeah, small town life is definitely like, oh, I got some firsthand experience in that. It's where I grew up, and it does kind of become a bit like a horror story. No offense to everyone I grew up with.
And there's a lot of wonderful things about living in a small town.
That is true, also.
But
that is true.
Everybody knows your business. Like everybody knows everybody else, and there's a level of familiarity that can breed contempt and anger and resentment. And then on top of it, some of them are vampires and serial killers and cultists.
And it's a small town, so where are you gonna go? You just have to deal with Barb and Tommy being vampires, okay? At least they make a mean casserole.
They throw the best New Year's parties.
It's true. It's their time of night. their time of day, you know. Yeah. So you've got like a pretty good range of stuff, like products and game design, mechanics, and all of that. So like, how did you like? What did you kind of start with when you got into game design? Like, did you start out doing like D20 work, or because a lot of people start there, or did you or were you always kind of in the indie scene?
Well, it started with D&D. Excuse me, unsurprisingly. Um, it was low way back in 1999. I was invited to write a module for Living Greyhawk for the High Folk region. I was living in Milwaukee at the time. Wisconsin was the High Folk
Okay.
was the High Folk region for Living Greyhawk, and I knew a couple of the people who were kind of running that region campaign. Um, and I wrote a module for that.
That's a
And
good place to start.
Yeah, so I did that. It was fun, and I look back on it, and it's terribly written. It's a fun module, but it's not well written. Uh, but
We all feel that way. Most people
yeah,
feel that way about their first thing.
yeah. Well, you
It
have to.
got you started. It got you
Yeah,
started, and that's what counts.
yeah, absolutely. And you have to write some stinkers, that just barely or stuff that just barely does the job. And then, like several years later, I got the opportunity to write a little bit of something for Dragon Magazine. And eventually it turned into like I got to know a few people and got my name passed around, and I wrote some RPGA stuff for like convention modules. I wrote some
Hmm.
stuff, um, and then I got laid off.
And you had a
and
lot more time to design.
I suddenly had all this time on my hands, and
Wow.
I knew a few people, so I circulated, got my name circulated around, and I started writing. And this was during the fourth edition era of D&D, and I started writing a bunch of stuff for fourth edition, and it ranged all the way from like little short character centric kind of things like
Hmm.
class acts kind of stuff, like where it's just like one page of something about the warden or something about the shifter, or some the barbarian or whatever, and then all the way up to like some pretty sizable adventures. Um, if anybody remembers the Baba Yaga's Dancing Hut from Dungeon Magazine during the digital era of the magazines in fourth edition, that was me. That was the big one. That was 30,000 words.
Ooh, that is a hefty adventure.
It's big. It's like 50 some pages total with maps and everything.
That's a little book. You wrote a little book.
I did.
Ooh,
In a month. I did that in a month.
I try to think the only thing that I've written that ever had that many words was it was fan fiction, and it took me a couple years. It was long.
Yeah. Well, it was a weird situation because I got that assignment, and then like 6 weeks later, I was going to be going to Seattle
Hmm.
to visit a friend. And I talked to, at the time, my producer was Chris Perkins, and I said, "Hey, if I get this thing written, it's a huge module. If I get this thing written and to you a couple of weeks before I'm out there, can we sit down and talk about this rather than having this ridiculously long email conversation that we're going to have to develop things and make tweaks and stuff?" And he said, "Sure." So I was like suddenly under the gun. I had to punch it out
Well,
in
there's
like
nothing like
4 weeks.
a deadline to motivate you.
Yeah, so I punched it out in 4 weeks, play tested it once here, with the friends here, went out there, met with him, play tested with people while I was there,
Hmm.
and then came back and made revisions. And so the whole thing was done in like 2 months.
Hmm.
That
Now
was
I'm
pretty.
now I'm
That was
very
pretty
very
wild.
impressed. That is
That
wild.
was wild. I never did it again. I was happy to not do it again.
I'm actually like I'm thinking like I haven't really done word count, followed word count on most of the stuff that I've written lately. So now I'm like, how many words was the last thing I wrote?
And I couldn't tell you that number for most of what I worked on. I just know that that one was 30,000 because I know how it got bigger and bigger as we went. It was originally intended to be smaller, and I was like, I talked to Chris. I told him, it's like this hut has like 48 rooms in it, or 52 rooms, or whatever it is. It's got all, it's massive. There's so much going on. There's no way this is going to be 15,000 or 20,000 words. and he just kept letting me bump it up until it got to the size it needed to be.
Well, if I get rid of the stat blocks, because we can't count stat blocks. Let's see. With stat blocks, my last one is just shy of 20,000.
That's sizable.
Yeah, so without it, I'm sitting at 12,000.
That's a good chunk. I mean, I wrote a couple of adventures that were 12 to 15.
Ooh, it was, and it was certainly one of those, you know, sometimes in D&D you end up with a lot of those, hey, I know it's short notice, but we have a need.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you want to hear the story that ramps this all up?
Oh, yeah.
I'm in the middle of writing 30,000 words.
And
2 years earlier, I had told Chris, hey, I know that sometimes an author that you have lined up for something drops out on you. Life gets in the way, something happens. If you ever need somebody to jump in on a small project and crunch it out, let me know.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him that, and then I promptly didn't really think about it. And when does he call on me? The one time I get called on by any of my producers or editors.
When you're in the middle of this big project.
I'm in the middle of 30,000 words of Baba Yaga's Dancing Hut, and I write a tavern profile for the Beached Leviathan in Neverwinter. And I did that in one night. Mm-hmm. I got home from work, I sat down, I researched everything I needed to know about Neverwinter and what the Beached Leviathan Tavern is supposed to be, and then wrote the thing and sent it off and got it accepted.
Good.
And then went back. That was, yeah. And I was happy I never had to do that again either, because it that was stressful. Because I was like, I'm worried. I was worried that I would send it off and then they'd come back with okay, well, we need you to tweak this, and then I'd send it off again, and we need you to tweak that, and this one night thing would turn into 3 or 4 nights, and I'm trying to get this giant module done as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm working a day job at the time, so this is all being done on the weekends and evenings. But they made some editorial changes to the tavern profile. I think Chris probably took pity on me and realized that I was under the gun for the other big project too, and didn't ask me to make a bunch of changes. So they tweaked a few things before it published, but in general, it's pretty close to what I wrote.
Yeah, I mean, and they, anytime anybody submits anything to a fairly large RPG company, that's what's going to happen. They're going to make a few editorial changes, and you'll be like, but this is mostly still what I wrote.
Yep.
Don't know how this got here, so somebody obviously had a thought all of a sudden. Let's see. I think, most stressful RPG thing I did was I came on very last minute. I don't want to name a lot of names because I had to do a rewrite, so I don't want to make people feel bad. But I came on very last minute. They had something turned in, and it didn't meet standards, and they wanted to make sure that what they turned in was good. That way, they were still allowed to continue creating for the program. And they're like, "Hey, can you edit this?" And I'm like, sure, with the turnaround. He's like, can I get it in 3 days? And I'm like, okay. I can sense that you're panicking. Why are you panicking? He says, it's bad. And I'm like, I'm not going to say the word yes then, yet. Send it to me and let me skim it. He sends it to me and I'm like, this needs a rewrite. Oh boy. He's like, yeah, that kind of bad. So I turned around 8,000 words rewrite, which is actually worse than just writing 8,000 words.
Sure, because you can't just stream of conscious your own imagination. You have to take all the things that were there
in 3 days. I was just like, okay, there's a story in here. We can work with this. But I mean, and credit to the original author, there was a good story in there. It was clear that they had never written in a standardized template or format. They were just a creative writer. And so it was just was fragmented. It hopped all over, and to any DM reading it, they were just going to be lost because the references for things that you needed to know, because it was a mystery.
Oh, even worse. Sure.
Those are hard.
That's mysteries are tough to write in general.
Yeah, my first thing that I wrote was a mystery, and I Not written one since, other than the rewrite. I learned the hard way. This is hard. Uh, but turned that around. I was like, okay, all right. Yeah. So, hello to Nerd Eye. They've logged in.
Well, that's me. I was
That's
just saying hello to everybody. I don't know who.
So we got a couple of viewers.
Okay.
I expect more rewatches on this because it's still the 4-day weekend and people are in the throes of doing absolutely nothing.
Sure. Which is what I was doing up until about a half an hour ago.
Yeah, no, I was having a bit more of an exciteful weekend. But that's neither here nor there. So you got started with D&D and you did some more D&D work, and then somewhere we magically transitioned to Nerdburger.
Yeah, it's an interesting little moment.
The two things are related
in my life. Yeah, well, basically what it comes down to was 4th edition started to wind down. And they were starting to do more system agnostic kind of stuff. If you recall, the kind of tail end of 4th edition had like they did a few books that were mostly story and setting and lore and stuff. And that meant that a lot of the freelance stuff and the magazine stuff started to dry up as well. And so that was what I was mostly doing. So I thought I could perhaps just wait for 5th edition, because
but who knows how long?
Coming. Yeah, I could wait for that. I could go and find other, because I had written for a few other places. I could go find some other stuff to write, just work on some other systems, or I could be a sucker and try to design my own game. So I decided to be a sucker.
Okay. I mean, but well, then by the definition, there's a lot of suckers out there in the world, which actually that's true also. But it's not a bad thing.
No, and I thought I'll give it a try, and I developed Murders and Acquisitions. That was a slow process. It took 3 years, I think, probably from inception of idea until the point where it came out for people was a little over 3 years, and it's not a terribly complex game. But it was it was all learning. It was all kind of learning curve, just kind of figuring out how to design the game itself, how to organize everything into a book. And in the process, also learning like, okay, what's it going to take to run a Kickstarter? What's it going to take to be to take on the role of developer for other people that are going to contribute to the book? I'm going to have to edit other people's work. I'm going to have to,
and then you have to figure out like
be an art director.
All of the behind the scenes position, art director, logistics, publishing. Yeah,
I'm gonna manage my own website. There's just all this stuff that had to happen. So, and the nice thing about it, not to discourage anybody who's thinking about pursuing this kind of path for themselves, is that you don't have to learn it all at once.
Oh no, no.
It comes in little chunks, which is nice.
And the other good thing about like the I mean, even more so now than it was when you were making the leap, the tabletop RPG community is so helpful. Like, there's so many people making this leap that if you like put it out there into the webs, like, I have questions, you'll get answers. That's the one thing that I've genuinely loved about this community. Like, as we've grown and everything, like more and more people are like, yeah, I'm let me share my story with you. You maybe can learn some things. And so, so I'm glad that you're doing that.
So I got a lot of a lot of advice and a lot of help from people, and I did a lot of research on my own to figure out what I needed to do. And then by the time Murders and Acquisitions was kind of well in hand, and I was kind of eyeing a Kickstarter date, then I started tinkering with the idea for Capers, and then from that point forward, there's just been this constant overlap of like 2 or 3 projects going at a time.
Only 2 or 3?
Well, 2 or 3 that are going in earnest.
I was like, no, don't be silly.
Well, I was in a weird period for a little while when I was doing supplements for Capers, because I had supplements that were like back to back to back, and there was always a little bit of overlap between them. And then I was also like doing Die Laughing at the beginning of that, and I was doing Good Strong Hands kind of at the end of the supplement period. So, and then there's always like, like I have an idea that I just jot, I sit down and I jot some things down, and I just have an outline, and I start to, over the course of like, 1 week or 2 weeks, I might just occasionally jot stuff down and just brainstorm some stuff. And then that game idea goes into a folder and it sits there for a while, and I may come back to it and I may not.
So you jot yours down digitally then. You don't have your house littered with like notebooks all over.
No, I'm all about having a Word document that's just like this living, breathing thing that's constantly evolving.
I never got out of the habit of like if I write it down, I'll remember it better. And so I have, oh my gosh, Jesus Christ. Really? My sister. She knows what time I do this, theoretically.
Sure.
But yeah, no, like, but I remember it better, and I'm able to like kind of look at it and like later be like, what was I thinking? Oh yeah. Versus like if I type it all down, like I have the words there and I can stare at them on my screen and I'm like, yep.
Yeah, I think everybody who
has
does
kind of has their
stuff
way,
or any creative stuff they find their way, right? They find the thing that allows them. Some people will have a Google document that they'll do it so they can access it from anywhere. Some people will just like perpetually carry a flash drive around with them that has documents on it, that literally goes like wherever I go.
That's a good idea.
Flash drive on a lanyard. I've had that, for years. And and if I don't have access to a computer real quick now with the age of the smartphone and everything, it's literally just email myself something, or use like a little notepad app and type some stuff down and just put it down and then transfer it into the Word document later. And then it just, each of those Word docs just becomes like, that's always how a project starts for me. It's like there's a folder that has the tentative title of the game, and then there's a Word document that is the tentative title of the game, and it says outline, and then it says dash in progress.
Okay.
And it's, and then I give it like underscore at the top, at the beginning, so that it's always at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Once other stuff starts getting added, it's always the document it's easy to find. It's always at the top of the list.
Okay. So you got an organization system. That's great. I love it.
I have my own, and it works well enough. At least it's gotten me this far.
I am a notebooks and whiteboard kind of girl. Relocated right now, so I don't have all my whiteboards behind me, but constant list of like just like guests for my show, things for the round table, deadlines I need to meet, and then in the extra white space on that whiteboard, I just jot down random things. That's my big whiteboard, and then I have like 6 or 7 more. I actually bought a roll of like the stick-on whiteboard, and I've cut off several sections of that, and I've just put it up on blank wall space that I have.
Jeez, wow! So you can just literally walk anywhere.
Yeah, well, I've confined the whiteboard on the wall, stick-on whiteboard to the office, so it's not everywhere. But the actual like portable whiteboards, they end up all over the house.
It's not everywhere yet.
No. I'm limiting myself. The stick-on whiteboard only goes in the office. If I need whiteboards everywhere else in the house, I just have to buy more of the actual whiteboards. It's fine. It's fine.
Everybody listening, remember that. And like 3 years from now, when Jenny's doing a show like this,
ask me how many whiteboard stickies I have on the wall.
Talking about what her current method is. Yeah, you never know. It evolves.
It's a method to the madness. I do have a Google Doc for one though. One project. Well, it's kind of a series of projects that all go together. But I have a Google Doc I'm sharing with my mother. We're working on a couple of things revolving around this character. Simon was her very first D&D character, Sneaky Simon, and so we've developed this whole kind of world story around him, and we're doing up a couple of supplements for like all the people Simon's met, so like important NPCs and villains and things like that, villains and a people supplement, and then like and monsters, and then like some of the interesting things he's found, so like magic items and mundane things and stuff, trinkets. And then places that he's been and he's worked, because Simon's had an interesting life. And then, oh boy, the more and more, my mom's actually started collecting gnomes now. Simon is a gnome. And so, like, every gnome she collects in her house now has a name and ends up with a backstory, and this just gets added to the document.
Wonderful.
And we're going to have this big, huge world. I'm eventually going to type all these notes into an actual game thing, and we're going to, because I have one adventure that I actually wrote already and it's published based on Simon, and so now, you know, it's gotten started, so now there must be more. But
sounds like a lot of fun.
It has been so far. And it's great getting, like, random text messages from my mother. She took a picture of the player's handbook I got her for Christmas and messages me. Simon looks more like a dwarf than a gnome in that last artwork you sent me. And I'm like, okay. Is this what I get at, like, 11 p.m. on a Friday? But yeah, okay. So you've got your system organization and everything. So when you're sitting down and you're like, I'm going to do a new project, like, what do you start with? You start with, like, an interesting scene you've thought of, a cool villain you want to design around, an encounter, a monster, like, where do you start? I mean, I tend to start with, like, oh man, I just read about the coolest monster, or I've had this idea for a really cool NPC. I start with a person or a monster generally, and then build a world around them.
Well, with game design, for me, it tends to start with like
and that is true. I don't really do game design. I do adventures.
Yeah. And I've been in that position too, where like oh, I want to just have characters fight this thing, like this monster doesn't get enough love, and I've pitched.
But you got to make a good story on how they get to it. What's the monster's life about?
Yeah. But with game design, it's usually like there's not a game that does this thing, or there's not a game that does this thing in the way I would want to do it.
Okay.
Like what I would like to play. Like I think you would get that answer from a lot of game designers.
Identify
a
gap.
lot of people design the game that they want, that they wish existed.
Mm-hmm.
So and the inspiration sometimes just comes, like, who knows? Like, it comes out of nowhere. Like, I wasn't looking for capers. I wasn't looking for an idea for supers. Well, actually, that's not true. I was looking for an idea for supers, but
not that one.
I didn't want to do like a modern day kind of supers game, because there's a bunch of those, right? And I just like,
yeah,
they're all over the place, and I can't compete with all of that. So I thought, well, it's got to be something that's kind of quirky, that's set in a different time period, or has some sort of twist to it that's very different. Because this is going to end up being a very niche game, I'm sure. Like, I've published one game that, it got made, but it's hardly a bestseller or anything. So this is going to be a niche thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching Boardwalk Empire.
Ooh, okay.
On HBO, and I was like, oh, well, what if these gangsters had superpowers? Like, what if Lucky Luciano was actually lucky, like supernaturally lucky?
Yeah. Oh God, that would have changed the show so much.
And so, yeah, it just sparked from there, and I started digging into the history of the era, and it meshed well, because I'm fascinated by that particular era in history.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a good thing. It was something that I enjoyed researching, because if you're going to do something historical, you better pick a period of history that you personally really are intrigued by, because you're going to have to do a bunch of research.
Oh God, goodness! I think I'd have to start with something medieval, but that's been done. That's my favorite period. I took a bunch of medieval history courses that I didn't need to take at all.
So it just kind of came from that. Like, Die Laughing came out of one of the deficiencies that I've seen in a lot of horror games is, if it's a horror game where characters actually die, as opposed to a horror game that's just creepy and
that's it, you're done,
that sort of thing. Like, well, what happens when your character dies? Like, what do you do? Like, oh, well, typically the answer is you make another character. And I thought, well, what is there a way to make a horror game where your character dies and that's it? Your character's dead. You don't play a character anymore. And I toyed around with a lot of different ideas, and eventually hit on this conceit of you're making a horror movie, and like, when your character's gone, then you become a producer, and you still have something to do. You still get to engage with the story, and you get to kind of have fun with it. And it's a one shot. It's a game that's kind of geared very well toward one shot. So, and it's short play. Like a game will play out in a couple hours. So even
Okay.
you're not going to be without even if your character is the first to bite the dust. It's not going to be a long time that you're doing this other thing.
Right.
So it was just I find myself just looking for something that doesn't exist, and I get inspired by it very often by like film and television media, by like stuff that I'm into.
Mm-hmm.
That I just I feel like to this day I don't understand why there isn't a Stephen King role playing game. Specifically, I mean, I don't think he would have a problem with licensing his properties to make role playing games. But
They're very. I don't. I mean, a lot of them wouldn't be very straightforward to make a game of. Not like Star Trek or something. Those are a bit more straightforward. Like this is what people do in the universe. Like Stephen King. Like there's a general theme, but he's kind of like all over the place as far as like actual story and world building.
Right, but I think it would be more a question of can you like you can set a game in a horror game in like Stephen King's Maine, where all of his Derry and Castle Rock and Haven and all these towns that
all
he's
these
created,
little towns.
where they all exist. Or you could do a Dark Tower thing where everything, most of the story takes place in Midworld, but then some of it is in Earth or some other alternate Earth. And, there's great fantastical elements that could be played out there where you could be playing characters that are doing things in those worlds that he's created. But it's never, there's not one out there. There are games that do kind of Stephen King-ish things. So I figured I would just kind of put my spin on trying something with that.
All right. Well, if Stephen King wants to let you make his RPG,
I couldn't afford the license.
no, he's just gonna let you do it.
Well, he's in the past he's done that. Like, do you know about the what did he call it, the $1 film club or something like that, where he would sign off the rights to one of his short stories to aspiring filmmakers for $1 to make a short film that's based on one of his stories, just to give an aspiring filmmaker
a very limited license to do something, because
they just one little film
to get out there and get some to have an opportunity. He's a nice guy like that.
Wonder if he'd license all of his all of those stories that are set in Maine for $1. I'd be on that.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. You could maybe make a pitch like, this is exactly what I'm going to do. This is the scope of it. I'm not going to go outside of that. We're going to put your name all over it. Tell people to buy your books. I don't think he's hurting for money though. I don't think. But
I think he's fine.
I think he's fine. I think he's okay. I think he's okay. The amount of Stephen King books I've bought in my life.
He also, he owns the stuff, and it's like, they're his babies, and they're treated properly. So with a lot of people who have these IPs that they've developed, the money is
secondary.
It might be about like actually making income, but a lot of it's also going to be about just like, we want serious offers only, please. Like people who are going to really take this seriously and like.
And that's why
treat the IP with the proper respect and do right by it.
Like my favorite author growing up, Anne McCaffrey, like handed it down to her son because she'd written with Todd and she knew Todd was going to treat Pern correctly. He wasn't going to exploit the world or over sexualize it or anything like that, and he's been fairly true to his mother's vision.
Yeah.
Couple of if you read them extensively, you can see differences between the two of them, but yeah, it does become like your world becomes, it's your baby. It's your little
Absolutely.
baby. Yeah. Okay.
I'm protective of the stuff that I've written. I think of it as like, well, that's my little creation. That's that thing that I made.
I used to be, but actually now I really get like, I don't know, an odd joy and happiness out of like taking my creation and then like sitting down at a table with a DM who doesn't know it's me, doesn't know whatever, and just like seeing what they do with it and just being like, you love this baby too.
I've been there. I get to listen occasionally to actual plays of my games, and I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
they're playing that game a little differently than I play it.
You
And
raise the child a little differently, but
I've
it's fine.
I got over that very quickly.
Yeah.
Like I've said all along that like the moment like I made the game, I put it out there. The moment you paid for it, it's yours. You can
Mm-hmm.
mod it up how you want. You can take this. You can take the fluff in the setting and use a different dice system or mechanic
Whatever
system
you
if you
want.
want. Whatever floats your boat. Like you've purchased it. It's yours now. So I don't get real precious about like people violating. The only time that I get a little particular about it, I get a little particular, is like if there's an AP that's happening in conjunction with a Kickstarter,
Mm-hmm.
because I want the game represented as closely as possible so that people get the right idea of what the game how the game is presented. If I don't want somebody to make huge modifications um, to the game and then have somebody see that AP and then back the Kickstarter and then get it and be like, this is nothing like what I expected. Um, but I haven't had any problems with that. I've had people that have done some major setting tweaks and but the heart of the game is still there. The
Yeah.
soul of it is still
I mean, most people, when they get passionate about a game and everything, like, before making any major changes, like I said, it's a pretty good community, and they tend to, check in. Hey, Craig, what do you think? And then,
I'm happy to see.
you can have that.
Surprise me, absolutely.
Yeah. And, similarly, like, I've definitely had people check in, like, hey, this thing, and I love it, and I'm building this whole world around it, and I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, but I have some ideas. What do you think of this? And I'm like, yeah.
You're
No,
building a whole world around it? Aren't those the best?
I love it. This is great. Tell me more.
Hey, fans of creative stuff out there, like tell the people that make the stuff. Just tell them how you love it and what you've done with it. I had one of the greatest compliments I've ever received was, it wasn't this past year. It was, I think, the year before. But I had somebody who informed me. They contacted me through my Discord and said, "I just wanted you to know that me and my game group love Die Laughing. We play it every single Friday night. It is our thing."
Positive comments are like,
and they showed me they created one of them created a custom monster for the game, and they took like the PDF of the monster page and pulled the text and everything out, put new text in it and everything, so they formatted it to kind of look like the page and everything. And I'm like, this is spectacular. Like you play this literally every Friday night. It's how they decompress from the week. It's like we all have our work weeks, and then we get together and we make a silly horror movie.
oh god, stories like that just fill our little designer hearts with so much joy and love.
Absolutely.
Yeah, somebody in the Philippines, Alan Patrick did a Kaya series, The Worm That Walks. They took each adventure in that series and made a whole Minecraft walkthrough. Like, very detailed of each adventure. Each video on YouTube's like an hour and something long. And I'm just like,
wow.
If that's not a love story, then I don't know what is. I was just like, dude, you're famous. Somebody's making Minecraft stories about your D&D.
That's spectacular. I had people just this past week. I had somebody show me artwork they did. They did like fan art of capers of something from their campaign.
I like their
playing
little,
capers.
yeah.
And they went so far as to even tell me that we discovered capers here recently, and it's helped this past year.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's helped us have some time to just get away and escape and not have to worry about all the
go to a little alternate world, have some superpowers, have the ability to change the world around us.
made my month. It was great.
Yeah. Okay. We are sadly nearing the end of our time for today. I know this has been so much fun. We've got finally. So before we go though, we got a comment there. Koga B says, same thing with my monster stuffed animals. It's great when people send in a story about their new adopted life. It just makes my month. Oh my god. Oh, that's a thing that I should probably do with some of my stuffies that I got from like Etsy sellers and stuff. Let them know the life stories I've created for these creatures. I never thought about
It's
that.
lovely.
Yeah, I've definitely like sent back like heartwarming emails to people who made like things on Etsy and been like, "This is what I've done with it. Let me tell you." And they're always like, "Oh, that's cool." And I'm like, "I did a cosplay thing." It's great. But yeah, end of the hour. So why don't you tell everyone where they can find you on social media, where they can find your games, and I'll make sure to get all of the links into the panel down below after this. So yeah.
Sure. Just a heads up, we didn't touch on this. I'm going to throw it out
Oh
there very
yeah.
quickly. I'll be running a Kickstarter, I think in February, for a game called Low Stakes. It's going to be like a small scale, rules light kind of zine style thing. It'll be just like 30 something pages. And it is essentially a game that is intended to replicate what we do in the shadows.
Okay.
Um,
That is a very fun show. I like that.
so it's not strictly those characters or anything like that. Again, I can't afford the IP for what what we do in the shadows to
It's
license
just the
that.
idea.
It's a
Yeah.
game, yeah, like gothic monsters living in a house together in the modern day and not being terribly good at it, and having all sorts of problems, both tied to being a monster and tied to like maintaining a home. So that'll be happening in February, I think.
February-ish.
Yeah. Well,
Oh.
if here's hoping Kickstarter does Zine Quest again. They haven't announced anything specifically officially yet, but they did it for the last 2 years. They had Zine Quest in February. So
Okay.
that's that. I'm at Nerdburger Craig on Twitter. You can find all about the game, find out all about the games at nerdburgergames.com. Everything is available at drivethrurpg.com. If you want the really fancy, the really nice hardcover for capers, I did an actual print run with like satin bookmarks and printed end pages and like that's on the website. If you go to
Okay.
nerdburgergames.com, the store there has that. It's not terribly expensive. It's not like a $100 book or anything like that, but it's like
Did you get the book?
it's a really nice, yeah. It's got those in there, and it's it's because it's a proper print run. It's a sturdier, it's a sewn binding, and it'll hold up
Okay.
really
Yeah.
well.
That sounds.
So there's that, and yeah, if you go to nerdburgergames.com, there's links to Facebook and to my Discord and all that sort of thing too, and I'm pretty active
Okay.
with all of that
And
stuff.
have you got the new Twitch channel on there too?
Yep, nerd_I.
Okay.
Will be starting back up with Wednesday evening games, Saturday afternoon games, sometime in the next couple of weeks, and then there's a Friday evening show that alternates between first and third Friday. Aloy and I just talk game stuff and other geeky things, and then second and fourth Friday of the month, me and Jess Geyer from uh, uh, wannabe games. Jeez, I can't believe I blanked. We're doing a thing called RPG R&D where we talk jamming and also game design and then some other geeky stuff.
That would be fun. I'll have to
So,
tune in.
and that one goes into the podcasts as well for people who like just the audio only. I've got that hooked up as a whole podcast thing. So there's a few episodes of that out.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again so much for being on the show. You've been excellent start to the year. Start us off strong. Super excited. Next week, I believe that I have entirely forgotten who I who I have on the show. Hold on, trying to pull up my calendar real quick because I'm like,
Want me to riff and fill? I can.
Oh no, I've got it.
Fill the space while Ginny pulls up.
Next week I have Marco Bernardini. I had my week switched. I was like, is it Marco or Andrew? Marco Bernardini next week, who is an amazing map maker among other things, and
nice.
So super excited to talk to him next week. Get some insight into that side of the RPG world, and and then Andrew Bashinsky the week after that, and then Teos Abadea, and then I, I have it right in my panels down below, and I thought about that after. Yeah, somebody's posting it from my. You know,
Oops.
hey, I did good. I didn't try to start this episode with "Welcome to this episode of the D&D Roundtable." Okay. I can't be expected to do everything, but yeah. So off to a great start for 2021. Finishing out the guest list for February and March, and I'll be announcing all of those soon. And so yeah. Stay tuned, and thank you for tuning in today. That's it for this episode of the Designer's Den. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ginny, for having me.
Of course.